Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Sunday talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. I'm one of your two hosts, Nor Kyle, along
And
with.
I'm also one of your two hosts, Mushtaq Ali.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us once again. Um, Gosh, our spiel, I guess. Thank you for being here, whether you're here live or watching on the YouTube replay. We really appreciate you joining us. We have quite a substantial group joining us tonight, which is interesting. Maybe the topic is what intrigued,
I
which is
can't
great
imagine
because
why.
this is part two of a two-parter. So you may want to check back on the last video we did on tonight's topic. And that's going to be last week's video, last Sunday night's video. But in the meantime, you know the deal, the whole like, comment, subscribe thing. We benefit from that just like everyone else does.
Or if
We're,
you'd rather be different, subscribe, comment, and like.
yes, sure. And of course, share our content with your social networks if you feel called to do so. That helps us out too. And we have several links down in the description. You can join our Facebook group. You can have a one-on-one with either or both of us. You can donate to support our work if you feel called to do so. We do happen to have some pretty cool swag in the form of t-shirts that are available as well. All of these things are there for you, and all of them help us out. So thank you. Have I left anything out, Mushtaq?
Nothing important.
Yeah, so why don't we begin? We are talking about something that we've discussed in previous conversations within the past month or two. We're visiting the Insan Al-Kamil, which is a perfected, completed human being. We are talking about the Enneagram as well. And interestingly enough, we're talking about how these two things touch in on engagement with so-called higher dimensions. So we'll be expanding on that this evening after beginning that conversation last week.
Yeah. And we have pictures.
Yes, we have diagrams. So hopefully that will make it easier to follow along in this discussion because it can be a bit to wrap our brains around, and even more so without, illustrations. So
Yeah.
let's
And
see where the
we've set
conversation
it up
takes
today
us.
so that the illustrations will even, I'm very excited about this, be able to move and such things so that I can uh, help make this happen.
Yeah, to facilitate understanding. Ah, so that is my little intro. Now, where should we start this evening's conversation, Mushtaq?
Let's start with a story. So we're going to be talking about higher dimensions, what they are and what they aren't, which means that we're going to have to take you back to, well, for me, it was probably fifth grade when we started getting heavy into geometry. And I was first introduced to the idea of dimensions beyond the third. Something that I glommed onto immediately and have been fascinated with my entire life. So we're gonna give you a bit of a metaphor. I cribbed this metaphor from E.J. Gold, for those of you who know him. Uh, and it's in one of his books. If you know which book it is, mention it down in the comments so that everybody can know. Yeah, I read this years and years ago when it first came out, and it stuck with me because I thought it was a really good description of the problem. And so here's the problem. You're a fish. That in itself is a problem. And you're in a large aquarium. You've lived in this aquarium your whole life. There's other fish there, there's other creatures there. And it's a big aquarium, lots of room, you can swim around, and that's your whole world. One day, you get the idea that there might be more than what you're seeing. And through lots and lots of struggle and work, you notice that the aquarium has walls. And those walls are in fact transparent. Never noticed this before because it never occurred to you. But you see the walls. You look out and you get the idea that there is something beyond the walls. Now there's a problem because you can't go past the wall. And if you found a way past the wall, you'd die because you're a fish. And the other side of the wall is air, not water. Nothing for you to breathe. So what do? You're sitting there and you're going, there's something there. There's a dimension beyond the one that I can experience here. And so you observe it. You train yourself over time to be able to perceive what's past that wall. And you learn certain things. And you understand that there is something beyond that wall that somehow does something for you. You don't even know what it is, but you observe that there is this being, for lack of a better word, that is as big or bigger than your aquarium, bigger than the whole universe that you live in, that occasionally drops food down from above and changes your water and does all of this other weird stuff. But what you figure out is that as long as you are a fish, all you can experience is the aquarium. But there is something that can perceive beyond your fishness, that can experience what is beyond the wall in some way or another. And this is very much like our experience of what we call higher dimensions. You can't get there from here, but we can perceive them. We can train ourselves to take what we have habitually assumed was invisible and make it visible. And we do that by training our perceptions. Here's the secret. You have to have a body. No body, this doesn't work. The good news is, if you're listening to me, you have a body. Almost certainly. Your body, whether it's a fish body or a human body, is your only tool for perceiving higher dimensions. Whatever perceptions you can receive are created within what you are given to exist in on this plane. And it's not like you can float up out of your body because, contrary to classical belief, you're not a ghost in a machine. You're a field phenomena. And your body is what holds that field together. It creates the two poles that give you the field. Is this making sense so far, or at least are you following me?
Or any questions so far?
Yeah, challenges.
Can you remember the outside world, outside this aquarium?
How can you remember it? You've never been there, as far as you know. You can perceive the outside world if you train yourself to it. You have to do something weird with your eyes. In the case of being a fish in the aquarium, you have to learn how to see through the glass.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that in physics today, pretty much everything is regarded as a field phenomenon. But it's very interesting to have the idea that that's what's going on with our bodies, and it makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Thanks, Ian. So we have a question from Naomi
Yeah.
who just asks us to elaborate a bit. Ghost in the machine versus field. I think I understand. Just want to hear you elaborate on what you mean. Everything else is copacetic.
So one way that people have modeled themselves is you have a meat machine, and somewhere inside this meat machine is a ghost, and they're separate. And one day the ghost is going to leave the meat machine. To model this as a field is different. So think of a magnet. You have a bar magnet. The bar magnet has two poles, and it has a field between those two poles that you can see. Put a piece of paper over it, sprinkle iron filings, and it follows the field of magnetic energy going around the bar. The weird thing is, if you take that bar and you cut it in half, and you move the two halves apart, you don't have a negative pole on this one bar and a positive pole on this other. You still have the field. Fields become smaller, but it's a whole field. You cannot cut the bar small enough that you only have one pole. And we would say that we, human beings in all life, is like that, in that one pole of the field that we exist in is, for lack of a better term, consciousness, being. The other pole is matter. And between those two, you have life. And you cannot really separate them. That's what we say.
Yeah. And an everyday way of thinking about this is how, in common parlance, people are starting to talk more about the mind body connection, quote unquote. And sometimes these have been viewed as two separate things, but as
Even the way we talk about it.
yeah, it's so hard to talk about this, but
Yeah.
we're realizing that they're not separate, that they are very much, one and the same, as opposed to being two very separate facets of being. And so when we talk about a field phenomenon, that's similar to what we're getting at here. Instead of it being that the mind is, in this vehicle of the body, separate, they are intertwined to the point of being almost indistinguishable, basically being indistinguishable. You cannot have one without the other.
Is this kind of like the idea that there is nothing supernatural, only like what we don't understand?
I don't like that. I mean, this is part of that. There is no such thing as supernatural, because supernatural implies abrogating the laws of physics. And as far as we can tell, nothing does that. So there's natural, some of which we understand, some of which we don't understand, some of which we may understand in the future, and some of which we'll probably never figure out.
Yep. Yeah.
So would this be
language,
like a hold-on or a Mobius strip?
Like
Either of no.
Yeah, I would suppose. What do you think about that, Ilmar? You know more about that whole I forget what they call it, the integral thing. That's where the term holon comes from, I think.
Well, in Wolverson's of holon, yeah, I guess we are, in his view, holons, and holons within us, and holons, so which we are part of, But I'm not familiar enough with a specific enough definition of a holon to really comment much on it.
Note to self, find a better definition of holon other than that thing that what's his name talks about.
Yeah, but Ilmar's touching on something interesting about
Yes.
I mean, I feel like I use this word a lot. The fractal nature of beingness.
Yeah.
And that's another thing you were talking about, Mushtaq, was kind of like the fractal nature of magnets, right? Like
Yeah.
they're always going to have two poles. You can't cut them small enough to not have two poles.
Yeah, and the thing is, that which we call Mushtaq, that which we call Nur, that which we call James, exists only as long as the field integrity is there for it to exist. When the field integrity breaks down, it ceases to exist. Consciousness still exists, being still exists, but the particular crystallization that we think of as ourselves might not.
Thank you for speaking to that, because I was having a little trouble getting into that aspect of it, but that helps. Yes.
Yeah.
And are you suggesting that the body, in some sense, is kind of what produces this crystallization that you're talking about, or produces
I'm
this
absolutely
polarity?
suggesting that the Sufi axiom is that the ego is of the body. The ego is created in the body itself. It is formed and crystallized in the body, and without the body, there is no ego.
And that includes the personality, the thing
Yes,
that we
personality and ego
think
I'm
of
using
as us.
interchangeably in this sense.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Okay.
we are going to
I think-
understand this phenomena. We have to understand dimensions.
Did you have one more question, Naomi? No? Okay.
No?
Perhaps you can,
We'll
if
take
it's still
all the
there, we
questions
can.
you got. So yeah, don't worry about taking up time. Your questions are probably more important than my answers.
It was less a question and more just like another map to look at this from, just from my Cabalistic perspective and history. The degrees of emanation from source to mundane matter, like the 10th step from God is matter, and there is no like separation, only degrees of differentness, and each step along the tree of life, each sphere is an identifiable state, and 10 is earth, which is the mundane world. So that's kind of similar to the idea.
Yeah. It basically is, and you look at the tree of life as if it were what held the field.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks,
So,
Naomi.
let's talk geometry. You all know about dimensions, right? We live in a three-dimensional space. 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time. We aren't going to talk about time. I've talked about time several times before. Nobody wants to hear about time. But we're going to talk about space. This is probably also not going to be one of our most popular videos, but I don't care. What is no dimensions? Who can remember their high school geometry?
A point.
That's right, a point with no breadth, no height, no depth. 1 dimension would be a line. And as a matter of fact, this is where we're going to pop that up right about now. And I'm going to share my screen. Sorry. Let me know when this shows up.
You're good.
Okay, so we're going to imagine that this green and blue line here has no width. It's just one axis, but if I made it thin enough to actually be that, we couldn't see it. This thing here can only move like this
To the right,
and like this, just along that line.
to
Can't
the
move
left.
anywhere else. Now, here's a thing. You see these lines here? They are the way that we would like this to move, but in order for it to move this way, it has to move through the second dimension.
So
And
we've got counterclockwise arrows.
And all of a sudden, it's mirror image to what it was. And if you were living on this line, you would be going, what the heck just happened? You just got turned inside out and backwards. So think about that for a second. The only way for that to move to where it can actually reverse itself is to move out of its dimension and into the next. It's kind of hard to visualize that. So what I have here for you, I have 2D figures. Now you'll notice that there are two figures here, and they are mirror images of each other, two different colors. If I take this figure, there is nothing that I can do I cannot move it around so that it fits in its same, I cannot overlay it. You understand what I'm saying here? This will not fit on this. In order for me to make this fit completely over this, I have to flip it through the third dimension. If I do that, it's very interesting. I just flip it along its what would be its vertical axis. And now voila, it fits. Just like that, and I can hide it behind it. But if I flip it again, it doesn't fit anymore. So you have this plane, and I have to rotate it around the plane on its third axis, which it can't perceive. Now, one of the things that got me totally hooked on this was reading a book that was written back in the late 1800s called Flatland. And as a matter of fact, I have a PDF copy of it somewhere, and I will put it up on the forum. You can download it. It's in the public domain. You can have your very own copy of it.
The forum is our Facebook group for those who are not familiar. So you can join there and you'll be able to get it.
Yeah. And who wouldn't want to be in that group? But you all get the idea how I cannot rotate this through 2 dimensions and have it line up. I have to take it through the 3rd dimension.
Yeah, no matter how many times you turn it in a clockwise or counterclockwise
Counterclockwise, or
way, it's
raise it or
never
lower it. It
gonna
will
fit.
never fit.
So you have to flip it. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to align them, overlap them.
Now, here's the terrifying thing. If I flip this, I turn everything that I'm flipping kind of inside out. Not exactly, but I'm mirror imaging everything. If this were an animal, let's say if this were a human being, and I flipped it through the 4th dimension back into the 3rd, so that it's now a mirror image of what it was, that person would no longer be able to digest food in the 3rd dimension. Why would that be? Any ideas? Anybody know enough biology to take a stab at that?
I don't know about biology, but I could imagine that if a being on that plane had to go through an operation or an interchange like that, it would like change their like biological orientation in such a way that would no longer be compatible with the dimension that they're in. Right? Is that
Exactly
what you're
right.
saying? Yeah.
First of all of your organs would be reversed. Remember, you're now a mirror image. So your liver's on your left, your spleen is on your right, your heart's on your right, all of these sort of things. But even more than that, most of the amino acids that we need are L amino acids. That means that the molecule is a left-handed molecule. If you get mirror imaged like this, if you get reversed, you would need R amino acids, right-handed molecules. And there's not many of those around.
And
So
your
all of a sudden-
receptors will not have anything that plugs into them.
Yeah. So you will not be able to digest the food that you've eaten your whole life because your body has been irrevocably transformed. You know, if we put it on an Enneagram, that flip would be at the equator and there's no coming back from that. Does this make sense? I mean, I'm going through this really fast. Usually this would be a couple of days worth of teaching to give you the geometry that you need to have a sense of this. And I'm just winging it right now so that you get the basics so that we can get to the fun stuff.
We've had a few head nods affirmative. So I think we're good. I think we're okay.
So we live in the third dimension, 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time. And one of the ways that we can represent that is with this. This is called a Necker cube. And you can see here that we have these 3 vertices, which represent right angles. I mean, they don't look like they're right angles here, but if you were holding a cube, it would be right angles. There's a funny thing here. If you actually had a cube, you could not look at it in such a way that you could see what you can see with this. And the easiest way to do that is if I do this, you notice how that helps you see one of the spaces, one of the directions that the cube is going. If I turn that off and turn this on, you can now see it going in the other direction. And now, with just a little bit of practice, you can take this cube and flip it back and forth in your mind so that you're either looking up on it or down on it. And once you do that, you can't undo it. You'll always be able to see that. And what you're doing is you are flipping the cube through the fourth dimension in your mind, basically. It's not what's really happening, but that's a good metaphor for what's happening. Does that make sense? Anybody not be able to see the cube both ways, looking down from the top, up from the bottom?
Why don't you show it one more time, just for good measure?
Okay. Here's one face.
Yeah, front face.
Or the back face. Then here's the other face, which can either be the front face or the back face.
Yep.
So,
James, yes.
Is it normal to have a weird little thrill of exhilaration every time I flip the cube one way or the other? Am I just a freak?
I don't know if
Nothing
it's
wrong with
normal,
it.
but I do too. I have that same thrill
Yeah,
because it's cool.
yeah. Quite enjoying it.
Get that idea that this is a metaphor for being able to glimpse into a higher dimension. By moving this cube to its mirror image in your mind, you have to move it through what might be a higher dimension for it to get there. Which gets us to our next image. If we wanted to represent a fourth dimensional cube, this is called a tesseract. This is a cube with a fourth right angle. The fourth right angle is represented, where is my, right here. It's represented by these lines here as the fourth right angle.
Yeah, if you want, to maybe grasp this at first, you have a large cube with a smaller cube inside of it, and then the corners of the large cube and the small cube are connected with lines.
And all of the funny things that happen when you are experiencing, when you are able to manipulate things at this level are pretty weird. Like things that to us in the third dimension that are solid would not be solid in the fourth dimension of space. Now, this is one kind of 4D object, or one view of the tesseract. We are now going to look at a different view of the tesseract, and we're going to start, boom. This is the Yasevi crest. Sufi orders have crest, coat of arms. They have a different word for it in Arabic and in Turkish and in Farsi, but in English we can call it a crest. And it has all manner of cool things in it. For those of you who don't recognize the symbols, this symbol here, right in the center, is Hu, and it's Hu 4 times. When moving outward from that, you have the Arabic word Haq, which means truly real. Moving out from that, you have the Arabic word Hay, which is life, be alive. And out from that, you have Allah, which is the name that encompasses all names. This is all very mystical and cool and everything. But what if there were more to this that we can't see on the surface? What if there were a mystery hidden in here? And I'm going to begin to show you. First thing I'm going to do is take the colors away. Boom. So this is what it looks like without the colors. Then I am going to take away the words. And then I am going to take away that outer bounding box. And we have this. You know what this is? Give you a hint. It's another view of a tesseract.
There's a lot going on with this one.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is traditionally a meditation device for our particular path. We learn to, first of all, visualize it. And we learn to change it in a number of different ways. Just like you did with the Necker cube, you can do that with this. You can begin to change it in various different ways and see all of the possible shapes that exist within it. Once you can see it with the image in front of you and being able to visualize it. This is, by the way, it's really easy to make this. This is just 8 squares. Did you know that? Take a look here. Here's your first square. I take the same square I duplicated, I rotate it 45 degrees, and I set 1 point against 1 point. I repeat that 6 more times, and I have this diagram. Easiest thing in the world to make. And yet, when it's together, it becomes really complex. So, when I was first taught this, I spent a year training myself to visualize this completely in my mind's eye and then manipulate it at my will to do every possible, I'm pretty sure I found every possible permutation of the image that I could find. You know, it's like, oh, this is up, this is down. These are here. There's a cube going this way. There's a cube going that way. There's
yeah, so that's same exercise you're doing where you're shifting emphasis on various facets of the shape, right?
Yeah, but this shape allows you to see more.
Yeah.
That's the cool thing about it.
Right.
So I will tell you right now, and for those of you who are in the forum, when I put this video up, I will also put up this image in one of the comments. So you can download it and play with it and drive yourself crazy. Exciting, yes?
So exciting.
So exciting. But what this does is it trains your mind to move through that 4th dimension. And I am going to stop the share now so we can go back to talking to each other. So, thoughts?
That was cool as hell.
I think that it kind of is, yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting because at the beginning I was seeing a lot of diagonal lines, and then just really not long before the end of when you were showing it, I suddenly saw that there was like 4 squares sort of in a cross and then 4 diagonal squares connecting them, and I hadn't seen that before, so it was very interesting to notice that.
Yeah, at a certain point it kind of popped in my head. It was like those those magic eye books.
Yeah.
Like
It is
you
kind
look
of
at
like
it
that.
for a long time and then it just suddenly goes whoop. You're like,
Yeah. And then being able to do that, but then
Oh.
shifting to see what different ways it can pop out at you.
wow.
That's another part of this challenge. Yes.
Because one of the things that this teaches you, and this is an important lesson, is that consciousness is intentional. The outcome of this exercise is to be able to create this image perfectly in your mind's eye and shift it at will from one perspective to the next through all 4 dimensions. And that means that you are doing it with your own intentionality. It's not happening to you. You are happening to it.
So it's, in a way, you can imagine there could be a video. You see a lot of these videos of hypercubes where you see the shapes moving in and out and permutating and everything. Can you practice, instead of having to watch a video to do that, can you practice getting better and more flexible at envisioning that for yourself?
Yeah. And
And
some
that's,
people are going to say, I can't visualize. Well, newsflash, visualizing is a skill. Any skill can be acquired. Some people are better at it than others, but anybody can learn to do it. I mean, maybe if you've been blind from birth, it might be difficult, but there are other ways if that's the case. But for those of us who can actually see, if you can see with your eyeballs open, you can teach yourself to see with your eyeballs closed.
Ilmar. And
Yeah, it's interesting.
yes, I'm
Interesting.
sorry, Ilmar. I want to touch in on Ajit's question. He asks, wondering how many cubes there are in the form.
A lot.
This is something that you may have to, that may be part of the practice, right?
Yeah.
Is taking time to scope out where you can see the cubes in the form. It's less a puzzle, more an exercise. So Ilmar, I'm sorry that I interrupted you, and then Naomi, I'll
Yeah,
give you an
but we should
opportunity.
answer the question, is it a WhatsApp group or is it a Facebook group?
Yeah,
Facebook group, because we don't use WhatsApp.
Ian was helpful enough to offer that
Okay.
it's a Facebook group. Yeah.
Yeah,
Ilmar.
what got me, what struck me is, I mean, you were describing this as an intentional act of, manipulating the perception of that cube. What I found is that there's another sense of intentional, which maybe is in a more technical usage, where seeing something as something is the implication of that it's not never kind of pure perception, it's perceiving it as something, as this cube or as that cube. And those are slightly different senses of intentional, but both of
you're
those
dead
apply
on.
here in this case. Yeah.
You're absolutely dead on that, because the other thing that it teaches you is that when you are moving through all of these various cubes that you can see, none of them are the real cube.
It appears to be such and such.
No,
Yeah.
so you are absolutely correct on that observation. You are not seeing the whole cube. You've graduated when you see the whole cube all at once.
And of course, that becomes very clear when you look at those simpler Gestalt pictures, like the old lady and the young lady, or it's up to the rabbit, that kind of stuff. With
It is kind of like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Thanks, Ilmar. Naomi.
Yeah, it struck me as that's one object, not a collection of cubes, and that the reason it's so confusing for our brains is that if it were like shaded in such a correct way as to see it as a single physical object, it would cast a 3-dimensional shadow. not a two-dimensional shadow.
Yes.
And that would be kind of like, from our perspective, impossible to work out in our
It
brain.
would be
Absolutely.
very, very hard for us to work that out at first.
Yes.
Mhm.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is what happens is 3D objects give off 2D shadows, 2D objects give off 1D shadows. So of
Yeah.
course 4D objects are going to give off 3D shadows, and that's just mind blowing for us. Yeah.
But as you practice this, you'll discover that it allows you to more and more clearly see beyond the glass. And if you can see beyond the glass, and if in fact consciousness is intentional, there is some effect you can have in the world. I was talking with somebody about the idea of manifesting. This has to do with that. If you want to create something in the world, you have to understand that consciousness is intentional. And it's not a matter of, oh, if I say the affirmation enough times, it's going to happen. It's a matter of shifting everything so that you can see the facet of the hypercube that you want to see. So that that shadow is the one that impinges upon our 3D world. And that's getting like way metaphysical. By the way, all of this is metaphor. None of this is real. Not a single thing I've said is real. It's all metaphor for something that is real. Should be clear on that.
Yeah, that's the best we can do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. James.
But in cultivating this more nuanced and more multi-dimensional vision, are we not allowing more degrees of the real, even though we can't fully encompass the real, and we're not adapting to a broader field of perception and activity within the real?
One would hope.
Right. Hmm.
Thanks, James. I wouldn't mind touching base with other people we have not heard from. Zach, what's coming up for you?
It's all very interesting. I like the metaphysical tangent of this conversation more so, I guess, because I keep thinking about how did we evolve from perceiving no dimension to these higher dimensions, and especially the fork from the third dimension to the fourth dimension. Like, what would require for our brains to jump from perceiving things in the world to actually manufacturing things that should not be in the world, like the tesseract, for example. And what's beyond that?
Yeah, it produces an interesting body of questions.
Thanks, Zach.
Yeah. And the closest I can come to an answer to that is, if you practice this image long enough, you'll find out. Guaranteed, you'll find out. You'll never be able to explain it to anybody, but you will have found out.
Yeah, because there's parts of this where you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
Similar to how once you see the different facets of the cube, you can't really go back.
Yep.
Same thing happens with higher dimensional forms. It's like once your brain clicks and renders them correctly, there is no going back.
Yep. And you have to be careful with that. If you are the fish in the aquarium and you see the higher dimensions, you train yourself to see the higher dimensions, you want to tell everybody. And all of a sudden you'll discover that all the other fish think you're crazy. Some of them will think you're dangerous. And we all know what happens when you scare a human being or a fish, right? We are definitely, when scared, when frightened, we are murderous.
It's hard to say. Yep. Thanks, Zach. Hey, Levita, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Cool. What's been coming up for you?
Too many squares.
It's a lot of squares. Thanks, Levita. You were cozy.
Reminds me of my my beatnik days. Man, that is so square.
Too many squares, man. All
Doreen, you
right.
snuck in while we
Sure,
wasn't
yeah.
looking. What do you think?
Trying not to think. Trying not to think too much. But I really liked how when you put that gray in, my first response was a front facet of the cube, but then I made it the back. And I around and I thought that's helping me just actually just recognize there's always another point of view, a different perspective, and that exercise in itself eases up that whole fixed thinking that I have. So I like that as an exercise.
Yeah, that's part of its charm. So I'm glad you pointed that out. Yeah. Yep. Thanks, Sheree. Anything else you want to add? No. All right. Cool. Ajit, what are your thoughts? I know you have to type in the chat. I don't know if you're able to come on camera or on microphone, but I wanted to give you the chance.
Hi, myself Ajit. I'm from India. First time attending the live program to watch
Thank you.
the YouTube records. That's great to have this experience. Actually one thing I got stuck is when I was asking about squares, number of squares. Are we creating the squares, or is it there? In either case, we are using our head only. We are using either imagination or we are drawing something. I really want to know what is beyond that when we do this exercise of visualizing these
What makes you think you're
cubes
using your head?
or even square.
Sorry, what was that, Mushtaq?
I said, what makes you think that you're using your head only with these exercises?
I mean, I couldn't find any. I mean, this is based on my prior knowledge of Enneagram. There's no kind of emotions involved in it, or probably I don't know whether intuition is involved in it. It's all about the head. We are speaking about the next dimension. I'd like to hear from you, Amistad.
So, in order to be successful with this exercise, you have to engage all three centers. In the last couple of 3 talks we've done, we've talked about the necessity of balancing the sensing, the feeling, and the thinking centers. Centers 1, 2, and 3. If you have not balanced those, you will not succeed at this exercise. This exercise is as much in the body as your digestion is. And it is as much in your feelings as knowing the temperature of the air on your skin is. And it's as much in your emotions as the amount of frustration you will discover that you can carry within yourself when you try and do this for the first 6 months or so. And then there's the thinking. It's all there. And it's a mistake to think that you are operating from just one center, because if you try and do that, you'll never get the exercise. Does that make sense?
He may have frozen. Yeah.
He may have frozen. Yeah, he's got really low bandwidth right now.
Hmm. Yep. But I think that was a helpful
I
question
think I just missed
because
the last sentence. Because
that it's critical to be successful at this exercise, successful in the sense of, you know, being able to manipulate the shape and get this learning about flexibility, you have to have all the centers engaged in order to be able to do that. And without that, you will not be able to develop that sense of flexibility without that 3-center involvement.
Ah, good.
Any other thoughts or questions?
Or answers. We'll take
Yes.
answers too.
That's fair enough. James.
I could go on a whole spiel if you want me to. But my two big takeaways so far was all working backwards. Firstly, with the this exercise, kind of reinforcing what I said just before. So we're interacting with a higher dimensional object, something which we can't literally conceptualize with our little monkey brain, but the act of doing so widens our capacities and perspectives, which
Yeah.
could be described as our relation to the divine or the higher or whatever. Anyhow, we'll never literally encapsulate it in a literal sign, but we have a symbol that allows us a broader range of functioning and allows a relationship to it.
Yeah, you might go so far as to say that this is a sneaky way of encouraging you to develop your higher being bodies that can actually perceive into these dimensions. But like I said, that's just metaphor. Nothing real.
The second thing is a bit of a rewind. I want to know if I was going off on my own irrelevant tangent here when we talked about body and mind, a field as opposed to a ghost in the machine. Now, the model I'd been sort of came up with from various different influences and I've been playing with is so there's a broad field of our personal being in which body and mind emerges localized phenomena of more density or more concentration. And the point that has the most concentration has the most consequence for activity in the field. And for most people, it's the body and it's most robotic. But other points in the field can get more density or more concentration or have more consequence. But none of them are split off and separate. It's all phenomena within a field. In the way I'm using the language field, magnets don't come into it at this point. And the field is in some way nested in higher dimensions of time that from our point of view seem eternal or of greater longevity or not as linear. So while the body may consolidate and then dissipate within the field, the mind may do the same, but the field itself has greater duration. I mean, that's kind of the idea that's been kicking around in my head for about a couple of decades. Is that how different is that from what you're proposing here?
A good question. And I'm not sure. I have not quite grasped your model, but you did remind me of something that I need to touch on, which is the idea of time. Time is also a dimension. We live in, as far as we can tell, 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time. And for us, that dimension of time only goes in one direction. It only goes to the right or to the left or up or down, depending on where you live in the world. Unless, according to people like Richard Feynman, you know, if you're a particle, you might be moving backwards and forwards along the timeline, or along the time dimension, as well as through the space dimensions. That opens up a whole nother can of worms.
Sure does.
It's just an idea I've been kicking around. It's not like my sacred and immutable truth. It's just because I've been trying to avoid the whole ghost in the machine and the whole crude mind-body dualism, but not out of any reductionism. It's for me, it's because the whole thing is anchored in a higher dimension, or a dimension not subject to or the limitations or the decay. I don't know. It's all a bit fuzzy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, when you die, the soul doesn't fly out of your body and go into an upper heaven. The soul is where it's always been, sitting in its dimension, but the body is no longer concentrated and active. It's sort of dissipating in the field.
Yeah. If
I'm
you have
familiar
done the
with
work,
what you're talking about, James. Yes.
yeah, and the caveat there is if you've done the work to hold a soul together without a body.
Yes, that is the possibility that comes from this idea. Yes.
Yes.
Mm.
And that's kind of what Gurdjieff was all about, was higher being bodies so that you can maintain your awareness after you die.
Mm.
I'm not quite as worried about that myself, but
I'd like to get some awareness before I die. I reckon that'd be cool.
yeah.
Yes.
That'd be neat.
Yeah, that's kind of a classic metaphor of the drop dissolving into the ocean.
Yep.
Mhm. Yeah. And it sounds, James, like it's kind of as though, we have this concentration of energy, and energy does take multiple forms. We have the whole particle wave thing. I don't know, this gets into like woo-woo
Quantum mysticism.
quasi-scientific stuff. Yeah, but it's just fun to talk about where yeah, if it were, we'll see, possible for the dissipation of the energy that is concentrated as the body, but then the consciousness is able to stay concentrated. Interesting. Yeah.
My model is shamelessly motivated. Like I was trying to avoid mind-body dualism. I was
Right.
trying to avoid another thing that I was trying to avoid in sort of mushing all that together from whatever many different
Yeah.
sources I've dragged it in from over the years. But
Yeah.
anyway.
And as we were saying earlier, sometimes even the way that we talk about things does not necessarily reflect what we're trying to communicate about the thing, because it's so hard to talk about these concepts, these ideas. Thank you,
Yeah.
James.
Lao Tzu was he was always correct.
The
that
Tao,
that
which
first
can
line from the Tao Te Ching.
Yep. The Tao that can be spoken of is not the Tao.
Yep.
Yes. Naomi, yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to know more about when you said that was Gurdjieff's whole thing about like maintaining the like spiritual body after death. Is that in a sense like retaining one's dropness when it enters the ocean?
Basically, yeah. I mean, from what Ouspensky had described, it was a matter of creating a vessel for your ego to survive in.
After the passing of the physical. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm dubious about that myself. I'm not sure that I even see the value in that, but
I think our tendency tends to be focusing on the here and now in this perceived lifetime. Yeah.
Yeah. And we would like to get over our fear of non-existence. Because that's what everybody's afraid of. Nobody's afraid of dying. They're afraid of not being.
And that leads to all kinds of
all the crazy
worldly messed upness. Yeah.
But if you get this, you will understand that you can't not be. Being is an infinite regress. Y'all understand what that means?
Infinite regress? No.
Turtles all the way down.
Yeah, what I want you to do, Naomi, is look inside and see how far back you have to go until you find the end of your consciousness. Take your time. And if you think you've reached an end, can you go one step past that?
You mean my earliest memory?
No, who cares about memory?
Can you reframe?
Yeah, reframe consciousness, I think is what
Okay.
she's asking.
Are you aware of yourself now?
Yes.
Can you feel yourself?
Yes.
How far does that go? Where does self end?
I see.
Yeah.
So how far does my extension of senses and being
And beyond the senses even. Yeah. You get to the end of the senses and you go, oh, I could go further.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I say consciousness is an infinite regress. Just like the universe going out this way, there's no end to it. You can keep going. The same is true when you go inward. You can keep going and keep going and keep going. There is no end. It is as infinite inside of you as it is outside of you. It's much bigger inside your head than you thought.
Like the TARDIS.
Yeah. Yeah, if the TARDIS was completely infinite, that would be the case.
From a slightly different angle, one of the things I started thinking about recently is that part of the whole problem with most of the standard images of the afterlife in the standard religions is precisely the fact that they assume that your personality is going to be the same there.
Yeah.
And I started thinking that people would get bored really fast.
Oh yeah, I figured that out when I was like 6. I was forced to go to Sunday school for a while, and the Sunday school teachers tried to describe heaven to us. It was like, oh, you will be so happy all the time, and you'll just stand around and you'll praise God. And at 6, I was thinking, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Why would I want to stand around and tell God how cool he is for all eternity? And
Yeah,
why would that make me happy?
I think things are like that are what start many of us on the road of getting more curious about what other narratives are there, first of all, about these
Well, even
things,
before
and
that,
then are they necessary?
yeah. And there's the assumption of the people in authority don't know what they're talking about. They're completely clueless.
Yeah, and the other side of that for me that was something that I realized when I was really quite young is, why on earth would this God need to be praised all the time?
Yeah.
And when I think about it with what I know these days, it's like, God, he has to be so insecure.
I wrote a whole paper on how my premise was that was sacrilegious, and I wrote my paper on that. Yeah, so I'm with you on that being quite an interesting line of inquiry in seeing where it can take us. Yeah. So, Naomi, did you have another thought you might like to share?
Just a rabbit trail. Don't need it.
All right, cool. Yeah, what do you think, Mushtaq? Do you have any last thoughts you want to share?
I want to find out if Maria has any thoughts. She's been very quiet. Thought you
Yeah,
weigh on us.
so when Mushtaq, when you said that in order to be successful with the exercise with the Yosemite crest, that we must use all three centers.
Yes.
And so after you said that, I closed my eyes and closed my eyes and tried to imagine what I can recall of that crest. And then I actually felt the tesseract in my sacral area. And so I had a visual of it there, I had sensation of it there, and an emotional response to it. So,
Cannot ask for more than that. That's exactly perfect.
okay, so I don't know if there was a question in there, but that was just the experience I had. And so it makes me excited to play with this.
Good.
Thanks for sharing. Very cool.
Yeah. So you're on the forum, download the picture. It'll be slightly different looking than the one you saw. The one that I like to use is white on black, because for me, it makes it easier to visualize. And if that doesn't work as well as black on white, you just use any paint program and reverse it. If you can't do that, ask me and I'll do it for you. It's a matter of mere seconds.
Well, it made me wonder of sort of the alchemical egg. And I've been doing a lot of somatic work, emotional repression work, and surrendering to the beloved. And what has spontaneously come up is I find myself in this egg. And the entire, all of everything is within this egg, including myself, including the world. And this experience of this tesseract was similar.
Yeah.
Mm.
It felt so.
Yeah, you can actually do this with spherical objects, but a fourth dimensional spherical object is so much wilder than a simple cube. You can't even imagine, and I didn't want to take the hours that it would take to draw it to do it justice. So, but if you can perceive that as an egg, great. You're ahead of the game.
Yeah, I think if I understand correctly, Maria, you're saying like that same experience of, as you were saying earlier, the whole on this, all encompassingness, and that experience of that came up for you in relation to manipulating this tesseract shape. Yeah, and that's very cool. And I think that that is an excellent way to, I guess we could say, anchor this, like to engage with it in a way that feels like a whole body experience and not just an intellectual exercise of puzzle solving, because it is so much more than that. So thank you for sharing.
And I wonder if actually looking at it as an object, on the screen was an obstacle to experiencing it in that way.
Probably.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons why this is considered a long-term exercise is so that we can visualize it, be like intellectually familiar with it, imagine it, and then be able to, as you say, not be stuck with this 2D representation of it, but to be able to manipulate it in our minds in real time and to engage with it more intimately. So it may take some time staring at it as a shape on paper or on a screen. And then once it's memorized, getting to know how it can be bent in the sense of, like, oh, this facet is in front, that facet is in front. And the better you get at that, the less external and more internal that experience can be.
Yeah. And there's a way to build an Enneagram out of a tesseract.
Oh ho.
I'll just drop that here and leave it. It's the secret of the bee. There's a hint for you. All right, that's all I got to say on this.
Yeah, guys, thank you for joining us and for contributing your thoughts and what came up for you, engaging with the shape of us today. And it'll be there for you on the forum, which is our Facebook group for you to check out if you'd like to join and download that. All to the good.
All right, so
All right, Brady Bunch mode.
it's in Brady Bunch mode. Say
Yay!
goodbye.
Yeah,
Wave
thank
to
you.
wave to each other, wave to everyone watching on the replay, and we will see you next week. Take care, everybody.